We are kicking off our second pillar, monetization, with a much-anticipated interview. As President and CEO of National Newspaper Publishers Association, Dr. Benjamin F. Chavis Jr. has spent more than 5 decades advancing racial justice and media equity. So please welcome to the stage Dr. Chavis, interviewed by Stagwell Vice Chair David Sable.
I'm Benjamin F. Chavis Jr. Today, with the good news.
We need the civil rights movement more in 2023 than we did in 1963.
Black-owned media should be supported. The mainstream media is failing.
What advice do you have for young people?
Don't ever put a period on your education. I think we've come a long way, Simone, but we still have a long ways to go.
All right.
Welcome, everyone. We're gonna consider this a working lunch. So if everybody in the back, just like this is great. You don't get an opportunity to have a working lunch like this every day. Come on in, grab a seat, bring your lunch, and let's go. So, Dr. Chavis, it's so wonderful, and we thank you so much for being here, for gracing our stage. So you've all heard a little bit about who he was. You saw the video. I just want to add 2 things. One is that he was the youngest executive director and CEO of the NAACP back in the day. More importantly, everybody listen to this piece of data. This is incredible. He led the Million Man March. Now, as if that wasn't good enough and big enough, today is the 30th anniversary of the Million Man March, and Dr. Chavis joins us from the morning news shows where he was talking about it. So, thank you.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Dr. Chavis, why don't you just say a word? It's really not about what we're going to talk about, but we were just talking in the back about how you got the permit for the Million Man March, and I think it's just a day of history, and we should all hear the story.
Well, you know, freedom of the press is fundamental to having a democracy. When I went to the United States Park Service to file for the permit, they had different categories, you know, entertainment, concert, rally. I said, no, this is a First Amendment gathering. And they paused and said, well, what do you mean the First Amendment? I said, we have a right to assemble, to address our grievances. And that's how we got the permit for the Million Man March 30 years ago.
Amazing. 30 years ago today, everyone. Big round of applause, please, for Dr. Chavis. So, look, everybody's here today, you're all here today to talk about news, the importance of news, the importance of advertising in news, because that's what keeps the news organizations going. Yes. And I think that the notion of news sources that are community-based, that are built around community and or faith and or special interests is really, really interesting. So just a word before we talk about the NNPA, which has today over 200 Black-owned news outlets, and I had the opportunity to work closely with Dr. Chavis a number of years ago when with other friends of ours, when we started talking about how do we bring the web into Black-owned media. But I think this is really interesting because at the end of the day, the history of Black-owned media begins in 1827 with Freedom's Journal.
198 years ago, in New York City, Freedom's Journal was first published.
And so here we are in New York City talking about the same thing. And what's important is the Journal wrote about primarily abolition and community uplift. So things that were important to that specific community that talked to the people who read the paper. And over the years, as the Black middle class grew, the papers grew and the number of news outlets grew. And today, Amsterdam News, you know, I have a very close relationship with, became a national force in this country. And again, doing the same things, exposing racism, talking about issues that no one else would talk about. And here you are today with 200 of those publications offering it to brands. Why should we be in your publications? Why is it critical?
The intersection of news and advertising, particularly local news and advertising, is very important. I would say that local media is more important in 2025 than it was in 1827 when Freedom's Journal was first published. I say that because there's kind of a return to what generates the interest of a community. Yes, it's headlines, but it's also more in-depth on how the issues affect the quality of life in communities. So if the news is going to represent those quality of life issues, racial discrimination is only one of them. There's a lot. Healthcare, I could just go down the line, the environment, climate. If you really want to get those issues addressed, you have to come from a local up to the national. And one of the things we found out in the National Newspaper Publishers Association is that advertisers get more than return on investment, because you not only get the number of people, number of readers, number of engagement. All of our newspapers have gone through a digital transformation. So advertising in the print, you automatically get the digital and social media. We have one of the largest digital networks in the country now as a result of aggregating our content, distributing our content. And we're learning a lot. I think technology, in my view, does not supplant previous media formats. I think technology enhances its effectiveness.
So interestingly enough, this morning, we were talking about this in the back, it was Dr. Chavis talks about the importance of local and how important local is. So Stagwell released some research this morning that I'll just share with everybody because I think it's pretty interesting. So 66%, I'm going to talk about this later in another group as well, but 66% of Americans use social media for news. Now that's not necessarily a good number, by the way. But what's most interesting is that friends and family are the single most trusted source of news. And I think you are arguing, rightly so, that your papers are friends and family.
Friends and family owned, but also friends and family deeply entrenched in our communities. Let me just say this. Trust is something you can't buy. Trust has to be earned. And I'm very proud that our over 200 African-American-owned newspapers have earned the trust of the community. And I would say this, that our readership is just not African-Americans. Latinos, white Americans, Native Americans, Asian Americans, everybody reads the black press now. On our website, blackpressusa.com, 40% of the people that go to that website are not black. So we are penetrating across racial lines. These local stories, while they come out of a racial context, have an impact for the whole of society.
So for those of you who are starting to think, as you listen to, maybe I should be advertising there, as you should, I will just add to the research numbers, which I think are really incredible. 64% of the population are looking to independence for news over mainstream. So, which kind of speaks to the fact that you've got a multiracial,
But I think there's a reason for that. I think if you switch to every television channel and everybody has the same headline, the same subline, the same argument is either to the right or the left or the middle, while you may understand the headline, you don't know the depth of the story. That's where local news comes in. People are looking for, yes, quick fix on social media, but I would also argue that they want the depth of the story, and that depth comes from local news reporting, local news dissemination of the facts. And that's why engagement. A lot of people, go to social media because they want to be engaged, want a return on investment. Nothing's like getting that newsprint that we still print. It's passed on. Not one person reads it. 6 to 7 people read that in the family from one source. And it's discussed in the family. And that's why we think that we have still a bright future in the media space, in the advertising space, in the news space.
So what he's talking about, by the way, is pass along readership. which for those of you who are as old as I am, know was once a very important measure, particularly in news sources. Today we call sharing, but sharing is not necessarily the same as pass-along readership. Pass-along readership is people actually read it, as opposed to just shared and passed along. I think another piece of data, again, from the Stagwell research that was released this morning, 70% of people are looking for local newspapers. They trust the local news more. They want to read it, too, just for the very points that you made.
Yeah, again, trust is so important. Just let's be honest. Some of what is reported today is conflicting. So people need to know what is accurate, what is inaccurate, what is truthful, what's not truthful. And I think people go to the sources that they trust to get the accuracy, to get the truthfulness. In our business, we say there's no such thing as an alternative truth. There's no such thing as an alternative fact. It's either the fact, it's either the truth, or it's not true.
So one of the reasons that we started the NewsFronts, we started the whole notion of future of news, was because Mark Penn had this vision of brand safety and the use of brand safety as an excuse for brands not to put their advertising in news, making news sources less powerful, less monetized, unable to provide the kinds of news that we need. So you yourself have often spoken, and I want to get this right, the quote, freedom of the press as freedom itself. So I think, again, on the 30th anniversary of the Million Man March, that's an incredible quote, freedom of the press is freedom itself. How does that connect to the monetization and sustainability? How do you see that? How important is that?
Yes. First, let me say that I've done some prior work with Mark Penn, great guy. I think that the whole analysis of brand safety is something that the advertiser wants. But the best safety is to be in those communities that will get the message of the brand, engage with the brand, and kind of, because in our community, we're brand loyal. So when I say that freedom of the press is freedom, when you get that truth, you're free to act. A lot of people don't act because they don't get the information, or they get the information late, and sometimes the information they get is not accurate. That's what I mean by freedom of the press is freedom. I would also, in California right now, people would say the freedom of the press is liberation, which is another form of freedom. And I see that we live in a very multiracial, multicultural, multilingual society. Everything's just not in English. But I think that we find a way to serve all of these communities. I don't think that diversity is necessarily a negative term in business sense. Most corporations say that they are making more profit when it serves a diverse customer base. And I think that, first of all, I'm glad that you're having this news front. We need more meetings like this. Sometimes it's better to meet like this than in an office where you're trying to make a pitch and the pitch may not go as well. But I think that it's in our mutual interests. The news, the advertiser, the sponsors, it's all in our mutual interest that we find ways how to not just work together, but find ways how to perfect the freedom of the press as the perfection of democracy and freedom.
Amen. So as we talked about, we're close to 200 years of black press. As you look out, and when you and I first met, it was about how do you better present your numbers, how do you create digital. Just when you look at current media trends and you think out to the future, you think about things like AI, telepathy, I don't know, whatever comes next, where do you think this all goes? Where would you like to see it go? Where do you think, where should people be placing their bets?
Well, just to be candid, before I got involved in civil rights, I was an organic chemist, so I come at things from a very kind of scientific, analytical way. I don't think we should fear technology. I don't think we should fear AI. I think we should figure out how to make AI as a tool to improve and to increase the effectiveness and engagement and the efficiency of what we do. So in the press that I work with today, we're finding out ways how to use AI to not only to be more efficient, but also to be more effective. I also teach at Duke University, so in the colleges, everybody's trying to figure out whether they should limit AI or whether they should train the faculty and the students and the administrators of the benefits of AI. I come at the latter. I think there's benefits to innovation and technology. If business leaders say that innovation is key to their profitability, then why shouldn't the news agencies also see that innovation makes our news dissemination much more effective?
So looking forward then, the black press has always been famous for its storytelling, for its preserving of cultural, not just cultural heritage, but not as a past, but cultural heritage as a present and future. How do you see that moving forward?
Well, I think storytelling is very important. Obviously, news, you want to be objective. You want to cite facts. But it is not only reporting news and facts, it's the storyline. What is the narrative that undergirds the news? And I think that's where effective storytelling is very important. So we not only, do dissemination news, we also do editorials, advertorials, a way to give a better expression of what that headline in the news means. So for us, I think that I would sum it up this way. When we engage our readers, it is also an engagement by the advertisers of our readers. And in social media now, while I think that has complement, but I don't see social media actually supplanting. I think what's the purpose of social media? Because we live in a society where people are isolated and they use social media to what? To socialize. And you use social media not just for news, but you use it for socialization. You use it for entertainment. You use it for sports. There's a wide variety. I would say this, and I know our time is limited, that the future of news has to be shaped. I don't think the future of news, we just wait for it to fall out of the sky, osmosis. We have to shape it. And I see conferences like this helping us to figure out how to shape the future of news in a way that will be effective for all parties involved.
Thank you. I also want to point out that, this is just my personal thank you to you. A number of years ago when I was involved in a program about anti-Semitism, and we were looking for sponsors in news, and we got many news sponsors. We also had many news outlets who didn't sponsor. The black newspapers, the Black Owners Association, stood up and for all the reasons that you've said, and took a leading role in supporting the Jewish community and for anti-Semitism.
But there's a reason why the black community supports the Jewish community, and there's a reason why the Jewish community should support the black community. Our narratives, our history, our legacies are very similar. I'm also the national chair of the Black Jewish Alliance. And working with Van Jones and others, we believe that we have to not only reflect back to the history, but what can we learn from it? When I was 14 years old, I was the youth coordinator for Dr. King. I personally saw Martin Luther King Jr. and Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel work together. And in those days, in the early 60s, we found out that it's better to work together than separate and apart. And that's what's needed today. If only Jews speak out against anti-Semitism, we got a problem. If only blacks speak out against racism, we got a problem. All of us should be speaking out against anti-Semitism. All of us should be speaking out against racism.
Amen. So we have time, Dr. Chavis, you have time for one last point, and I'd like you to make the pitch to go. And so, by the way, thank you all for making this a working lunch. Amazing, you filled up, it's great. tell them all in the next minute why they need to grab you as you walk off the stage, every brand here, and ask you about advertising in Black-owned media.
I would say media from communities of color. And, I argue that when people think that white people are not colored, white as a color. The truth of the matter is there's only one race, and that's the human race. And I think we've allowed these racial divisions to separate us, or the perception of racial divisions. The reason why I'm going to make this 10-second pitch to the advertisers and media people in the audience is that we need each other. We're not in competition. The more we have accurate, factual news disseminated to local communities, and the more we listen to local communities where their aspirations, where their dreams are also covered in national. To me, national should get its guts from the local, rather than the local to get its guts from the national. Support all media, but in particular media that's historically on the front line of the social transformation, the social change of our society. We are a better democracy today because of the freedom of the press. And a lot of times in my view, we focus too much on what has not happened. We focus too much on the tragedies, and there have been a lot of them. But there's also good news. I think good news sells. I think good news has impact. I think people search for the good news. And that's where we come in with the National Newspaper Publishers Association.
Dr. Chavis, thank you so much for honoring us, for gracing our stage. Ladies and gentlemen, a true
Thank you.
icon.